All set to go, Julie?
I am so, Tom.
Great. Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Mission Possible, Launch Your Waste Reduction Journey. My name is Tom Knezovich, and I'm happy to be co-hosting tonight's event with you with another member of the Nith Valley EcoBoosters, Julie Yutzi. The Nith Valley EcoBoosters is a group of volunteers that has been active for about 10 years. If you are interested in the climate crisis and other local and global environmental issues, and you want to make a difference in your community, please consider joining us. You can get more info about us on our website, nvecoboosters.com, and you can contact us at nvecoboosters@gmail.com. I would like to thank our supporters for this event, Kindred Credit Union, Future Ground Network, which is a project of the David Suzuki Foundation, and the Township of Wilmot.
So why a webinar on waste? Our education working group felt that it was time to focus on the fact that Ontario and Canada as a whole has a problem with its garbage. The amount of waste that we generate is among the highest levels of waste generated per person in the world. Waste dumping has become a way to solve our enormous waste problem, and we need to come up with better ideas or all of our landfill sites will soon be full. Although we as individuals are responsible for part of the waste problem, Canadian government, the corporations, and the institutions must also take responsibility and need to be pressured to do more to reduce their waste generation. To talk more about what governments, corporations, and institutions should be doing as well as what we as individuals can do to reduce waste, I am pleased to introduce our keynote speaker, Jamie Kaminsky. Jamie has spent over 30 years in the waste diversion industry. He is a seasoned international speaker with broad knowledge of local and global zero waste policies. He works with fellow policy advisors to create strong, practical, and enforceable policies that drive change towards zero waste. Jamie has made presentations at zero waste and waste-related conferences and to companies in the private and public sectors. As the co-developer of the first globally accessible zero waste education program, he has trained and mentored over 100 individuals and industry professionals. Jamie developed his policymaking experience here in Canada via the Recycling Council of British Columbia and as an active member of both the Metro Vancouver Disposal Ban Effectiveness Working Group and the Recycle First Coalition, a group of 12 of the largest processors in British Columbia. Besides his role as president of HS Recycling Services and HSR Zero Waste, Jamie is the director and lead policy advisor for Zero Waste Canada and a board member of the Zero Waste International Alliance Policy Group. He has been interviewed by CBC News, The National, Global BC, CTV News Vancouver, and CBC Radio Canada. And we are very happy to have him here with us tonight. So over to you, Jamie.
Oh, thank you very much, Julie. It's a pleasure to be here, everybody, and thank you for everybody for tuning in. I'm just going to quickly share my screen so I can have my presentation showing. And thank you for the introductory. So during this session, I'll be going through the who, what, and why of zero waste. I'll be talking about the importance of thinking upstream, and also we'll have a quick a good discussion on zero waste in terms of what some activities we can be doing and where we can focus to really improve zero waste or reduce our waste and recycling in our lives. So like Julia was saying, my name is Jamie Kaminsky. So I am currently I am on the board of the Zero Waste International Alliance. I am on the board of Zero Waste Canada, and I'm the president of HSR Zero Waste. And when I start my presentations, it's always good to know who's giving that information. So just looking at letting everybody know that zero waste is a journey. It's about not necessarily looking at zero waste as being the end goal, we always want to be getting to zero, but knowing that it's more of a journey. So we're taking that pressure off to think that we have to be zero waste, that everybody has to do everything perfectly. It's not about that. It's really what zero waste is really about is just moving along that path and taking one step at a time and getting closer and closer to your goal, to that zero waste goal. So my journey, like Julie was mentioning, I've got 30 years of experience. So I started when I was 9. So I started in the recycling industry. My dad started a recycling company called All Canadian Recycling Services. We'd started doing lots of recycling, and then I got into zero waste around 2013, 2014 with Zero Waste Canada. So who is Zero Waste Canada and what is the Zero Waste International Alliance? So it's important to know who's developing these policies. So the Zero Waste International Alliance is a global network. So it's a decentralized global network of zero waste community or zero waste organizations. So organizations from Europe, from Asia, from Central and South America, all over the world that come together to develop policy. But more importantly, it's a community. So it's made up of doctors, educators, scientists, engineers. So it's made up of all different types of people who come together and bring that knowledge of their community into the zero waste world and talk about solutions and talk about policies and organize different types of programs and education to disseminate what zero waste is in the region. It also works with businesses. So Zero Waste Canada's role as part of the International Alliance is to bring that zero waste message to businesses, to government officials. So this here is a picture of myself. I was brought into San Francisco from an Italian delegation. They were there to learn about zero waste. So San Francisco wanted to know what can we do more? How can we become zero waste and not just always focusing on recycling, but what else can we do? So I was brought into that to talk to the government to help them guide them on zero waste policies. There's also a vision and a mission of zero waste. So it does have a vision and it does have a mission. So the vision is a just world, a vibrant, resilient, zero waste communities in harmony with nature. And the mission is to work together as a global community to drive systemic change towards zero waste using environmental and social justice principles. So a lot of the times when people think of zero waste, they don't always necessarily think of global community or words like social justice or environmental justice, but really this is the heart and soul of what zero waste is. It's not all about what bin to put what product in. It's really about a community and getting in harmony with nature. There is a formal definition of zero waste. So the definition of zero waste is the conservation of all resources by means of responsible production, consumption, reuse, and recovery of products, packaging, and materials without burning and with no discharges to land, water, or air that threaten the environment or human health. So this is the definition of zero waste. I just want to emphasize that it's really about no discharges to land, water, air that would threaten the environment or human health. And on the other side of the screen, you have the zero waste hierarchy. So the hierarchy is really a funnel of activities, and the most important activities for zero waste is right at the top. So rethinking, redesigning how we're doing things to make sure that we're reducing the amount of toxins in our environment and the amount of waste that we're creating when we're doing activities, reusing and extending the life of products as long as possible. And then we get into the recycling, composting, and material recovery section, which is really what do we do with the materials once we've created this waste? So once we've created that waste, then what do we do with it? So when we talk about zero waste, a lot of times, a lot of people are talking in the recycling composting area, but we actually want to move higher up and talk more about reducing the amount of toxins and waste we're generating in the environment and about reusing those materials as much as possible. So why? So why are we here? Why are we talking about waste? So Julie mentioned in her presentation in the beginning that it's no surprise that we have a huge waste problem. So we have a waste problem, especially here in North America. These pictures were of downtown Vancouver, but really they could have been in any major city anywhere in the world. It's a problem. And what's going to happen with this waste? So there's only a few things that can happen when we're dealing with waste if we're not dealing with it properly. So one, ends up in our oceans, so ends up in the water. Two, goes into a landfill. Or a third option is we burn it and then it goes into the atmosphere and those toxins get released into the air. And then the toxins that are left over ends up having to be landfilled or buried in the ground somewhere. And then there's a fourth option, which encompasses any one of those options, which is we send it away. So we ship here in North America, sometimes we ship it away. And we always say there is no such thing as away. So these are all things that we want to avoid. We are currently in ecological overshoot. So what that means is we are extracting and consuming more resources than our Earth can regenerate on its own. We are acting like as if we are living on 1.75 planets, which is, everybody knows that there is only one planet. So we really need to make sure that we're conserving our resources a lot better. In North America, it's showing here, this diagram shows the pattern of consumption. So basically what this image is showing you is that if everybody in the world consumed at the rate as we do here in North America, we would need 2 to 4 planets to live off of. Now, we also know that other areas of the region that don't consume that much are starting to consume more. A lot of places look at North America as kind of, they want to be like us. They want to follow those footsteps. So in a lot of ways, we have to clean up our act and be a better example of how to conserve our resources. It's also a financial issue. So there's billions and billions of dollars in resources being wasted, billions of dollars just being wasted in terms of extracting the materials, using the raw materials, and then just tossing them out. There's also billions of dollars being spent on managing those resources. So trying to clean up the oceans, trying to clean up the environment. So there's huge opportunities in zero waste when it comes to trying to conserve those resources. So what have we been doing up until now? So how have we been trying to solve this problem? We've known it's been there. We've known it for a long time. And what is it that we've been doing up until now? So I would say up until now, the last 2 or 3 decades, we've been focusing on recycling, composting more recently. I would say composting in maybe the last 5 to 10 years is what we've been focusing on. But really, we've been focusing on recycling and composting. And this image here shows us the system of production and consumption. So it's very linear in a way, and then we're trying to make it circular by adding in recycling and composting to reuse those materials. So recycling is using those materials into manufacturing, and then composting is recycling the nutrients back into the soil so we can grow more food or grow more vegetation. So it is great that we're trying to do this. And that's fantastic because recycling and composting are great tools in the zero waste toolbox. But really, it's really only cutting off 2 parts of it, the extraction and the design part. So what happens is the further back you go, the more toxic. So we are eliminating the extraction piece or trying to reduce the amount we're extracting, but we're still not reducing the amount that's going through the rest of the pipe here. And not only that, is the fact that we've been recycling and composting for so long, studies show that in 2018, Canada is only recycling and composting about 28% of the materials that are being wasted or being discarded. So that means that there's a whole whack of materials that we're missing. So we're not actually recycling and composting as much as we could or as much as we need to. And a lot of that has to do with a lot of materials right now, there is no solution for it. We also call it, the issue for that, we also call it the wasteberg. So what the Wasteberg is telling us is that more materials are being wasted upstream. So when we bring something home and we toss it into the waste bin, what we toss into the waste bin is only a fraction of the waste that's generated from that material. There's 71 times that volume of material that was created and wasted throughout the whole system of production and consumption through extraction, distribution, and retail that we don't see. We only see what we have in our hands, and then when we toss it out, we think that's all that we're wasting. But really, there's a whole bunch of energy and a whole bunch of resources that we're wasting upstream from that material getting to us. So that's why it's so important that we have to conserve what we have. So really, the waste, the system of production and consumption should look more like this, where waste is being generated of every single aspect of the system. And if you look at it, it's more like a snake, because when we recycle, it's not always going back into the same product. When we're recycling, often it's going into another product, and then certain things can only be recycled so many times. Paper, for instance, can only be recycled about 6 times because the fibers get too short, and eventually it has to become, it has to be waste. Plastics can only be recycled so many times. So really, it ends up looking like a snake. So a solution that some people are trying to come up with, oh, sorry. So what the issue is that we're having trouble with is why we're only hitting that 28% is, one, things aren't being designed for them to be recycled. So when the manufacturer makes that product, they don't make it out of something that can be easily recycled. Two, not everywhere that they sell that product has the infrastructure to recycle it. So it may not even have a cardboard recycling system set up where they're selling it around the world. And three, contamination. So contamination, people putting things into the wrong bins, it being contaminated with food waste, all sorts of different types of contamination can make it really hard to recycle different products. So this makes recycling a very challenging system. So when we can't recycle and we can't compost, what people are starting to think about is burning it. They're trying to say, well, why don't we just burn it and create energy from it? Because at least we're going to get some energy out of it. We can't do anything else. Why don't we do that? Well, there's a big issue with burning your waste. So a few issues we have with burning waste is, one, there's toxic ash that's created. So there's 2 types. There's a bottom ash and a fly ash. Fly ash is what's filtered out of the stack. So everything that gets filtered out goes into a toxic ash that then has to be treated. There's emissions that leave the stack. Those have heavy metals in it, and those are forever chemicals that get into our environment. There's not a lot of energy that is created. They're usually quite inefficient. So the amount of energy that was used to put into that product, you're not getting back out. Often incinerators are built in areas of our vulnerable communities. So they're receiving the brunt of the health impacts from those facilities. We're burning resources. So once they're burned, we never get them back. And it creates demand for waste. So when we build a facility like that and we put a lot of infrastructure into it, a lot of resources, and we spend billions of dollars building and operating it, we want to use it and we have to feed it. So it creates a demand for waste, and it actually counters the ability to reduce the amount of waste that we're trying to create. And then lastly, it actually competes with recycling markets, because the things that burn really nicely and really cleanly, those are really great things for recycling, like high value plastics, clean wood, paper. All those things are really great for recycling. So we don't want to be burning them. So let's talk about systems thinking. So what does it mean to think as a system? So as a whole, thinking of the whole planet when we're making our decisions. And that's what we really have to do. So we don't want to just think about, okay, recycling, composting, and if that fails, we're just gonna burn it. We're gonna give up. No, we have to think more as a whole, as a system. Because ultimately what happens is, whatever we do, it comes back to us. For instance, when we burn our waste, it goes into the atmosphere. Those heavy metals settle into the soil, goes into the waterways, and then it comes back to us one way or another. It goes into fish, the fish eat it, and it gets biomagnified up into the food chain. And who's at the top of the food chain? Humans. So we're consuming the highest levels of toxins that get into our environment. So we really need to cut back on what's going into the environment in terms of toxins. So one thing that we've done in Canada is we've banned single-use plastics. So that's great. That's a great start. But let's look at it from a systems perspective. So our Canadian government came out and they came out with a message that they were going to ban harmful single-use plastics as early as 2021. So they banned things like straws, plastic cutlery, plastic bags, all types of things that are plastic, but they're focusing on plastic. So in systems thinking, when you're not thinking of the system as a whole, what does that look like? Well, the very next day, we saw articles like this. Ban on single-use plastics could be a boon for Ontario forestry industry. Forestry companies could benefit from federal ban on plastics. Why? Because now we're looking at creating those same single-use products, but just out of paper. So now instead of extracting oil, we're looking at cutting down trees. So really, if we were thinking as a system, we would say banning of single-use products, period, regardless of the item. It's not the material it's made out of, it's the fact that it's single-use. It's the fact that we use it for 2 seconds and we toss it out. This was one of the better ones that I saw. Vancouver Island Pulp and Paper Mill reopened thanks to an 18.8 million boost from province to create compostable fiber containers. So again, a single-use product that's going to last maybe a few minutes in the environment. So what are some of the solutions that we can do that avoid those pitfalls of the systems thinking process? Well, one thing that we want to look at is cutting back on food waste, because food waste is a big issue. So when we look at waste, we're not just thinking of paper and plastic. We also want to look at food waste, because there's a lot of food waste that we're wasting at home. So trying to make sure that we're consuming as much as everything that we put on our plates, eating our leftovers, make sure we're not purchasing more than we're going to be eating before it goes bad, things like that. There's also the idea of once it does become waste, trying to see if we can create a system where it can become animal feed before we end up even composting it. So what can be consumed for humans should be consumed for humans. If not, then animal feed, and then after that, composted. Repair. Try and make your items last as long as possible. We don't always need to go out and buy the next best thing. We want to make sure that things get extending the life of products. Electronics is a big one. Trying to make sure that we're getting our electronics repaired, we're extending their lives. But it doesn't just mean electronics. It can be any durable good that you're gonna purchase. Make sure you're buying high quality. It's gonna last, and it's not gonna get wasted. There's a lot of things that some people have, or even I still have, that was passed down from my parents that they've given me when I moved out, that I still use, like dishes and plates and all that type of stuff, furniture that I've received from relatives that passed it down. There's so much opportunity in the reuse industry. So we want to really think about extending those lives, reuse, repair. And then when we talk about single use, we want to talk about avoiding single use. Try your best to always look at reuse as the option, not thinking that just because it's recyclable, just because it's compostable, that's okay. That's the bare minimum. That's the bottom bar. You really want to think of trying to make sure that product gets used over and over and over again. education. Education is a huge one. So we want to start somewhere. So Zero Waste Canada, for instance, has an education course. It's a free info session, similar to what I'm doing here. There's also a 5-hour education course, Fundamentals of Zero Waste, just educating and learning more about these topics. That's definitely something that you can do. When you learn about these topics, then you can bring it into your work environment. You can bring it into when you're your community when you're volunteering. I bring these topics into everywhere I go. So, for instance, I coach my daughter's soccer team, so I bring it into the soccer club and I talk about reuse. I'm always talking about it with people. Why are we buying new jerseys every year? Why? I'm always questioning and trying to find ways of reducing and reusing those materials all the time, especially when I feel like things are perfectly good and don't need to be given away or tossed out. Join communities. So join different different communities, right? You have the Ninth Valley EcoBoosters, connect with them. There's also environmental defense that we work with in Ontario, Prevent Cancer, Waste Watch Ottawa, Zero Waste Canada. Find an organization and join that organization and start helping out. Start seeing where you can, get more information, be more educated, and always look for organizations to join that are looking at that top level. The reduction of waste, the reuse of products and materials, extending the life, repair. I have to say there's so much resources and effort going into recycling and composting. Those are great areas, but really what is really needed is people to start talking more about reuse, reusable packaging, reusable products, repair, improving those systems. That is what's going to make more of an impact. And then once those things are reused to the end of their life, okay, we want to make sure they're recycled, which means they have to be made out of a product that's recyclable. So I always want to say that zero waste is really about a journey. And I always have this this question I ask everybody. Of course, it's on mute, but it's rhetorical, so it's pretty easy to answer. So it starts with you coming in to your home and you see that you've left the tap on and the tap's running, the sinks may be clogged, and your house is flooded with water and starting to flood. And you see the tap running and water pouring out. You also see a mop in the corner. What's the first thing that you'll do? Are you going to pick up that mop and start cleaning up the water, or are you going to go and turn off that tap? So yes, it's a rhetorical question, but everybody from this would turn off the tap, because that's what zero waste is. Zero waste is turning off the tap and stopping the waste from preventing the waste from happening in the first place. So finding solutions that prevent that waste. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for that presentation, Jamie. Lots of things to think about, and things that may have generated some additional questions from people. At this time, I'm going to be introducing our community speakers, and we do have 3 community speakers with us today from the Waterloo region. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, and then they're going to tell us a little bit about their own personal experiences with trying to reduce waste. So first up is Mary Jane Patterson. So over to you, Mary Jane.
Okay, well, thanks everyone. Really interesting to hear Jamie's presentation. So it makes me feel even more strongly about what I'm going to talk about. I thought what I would share about is my own efforts to reduce waste from food packaging, and especially takeout. But I'll just start with food packaging in general and say, when I participate in the Zero Waste Challenge, that's what ends up in my jar the most, is food packaging. So starting from when we shop, I'm really noticing ways that I can change that by buying things singly instead of packages. But really what I wanted to share is about takeout, because that's been kind of a challenge that I've tried to tackle over the years. And I start with two kind of personal principles. One is no guilt, no judgment. If I don't do what I hope I'm going to do, I just say, next time, and resolve. So resolve, not guilt. And the second one is not to get hung up on whether I can do something 100% of the time, because then I might be paralyzed trying to problem solve it all. If I can do something 50% of the time, that's already a big improvement. So I don't get hung up on the perfect kind of solution. So I want to say first, to consider the beauty of the simple ice cream cone where you eat the container. I love that. And my goal for takeout is to not make any waste. And that's where Jamie's, your presentation, Jamie, really spoke to me, because I do think also about all the energy and materials that go into creating something. Even if it's compostable rather than landfillable, it's still got a lot of energy and probably waste in the creation of it. I don't have a big budget for takeout, but I do love it when I go get food from someplace. And part of this journey for me started when someone gave me the gift of a container like this with a straw in it. I'm not a coffee drinker, but I do kind of love milkshakes as a sign of the beginning of my weekend or my vacation, and getting a milkshake to take with me if I'm going somewhere. And this really made a difference for me. I started bringing it into Baskin and Robbins, and they were totally fine with me having a milkshake in my own container. They got to know my order, gold medal ribbon, no syrup. And I've been doing this for a long time. And at first, when I forgot to bring it, I would just say, okay, no guilt. I'm going to get the milkshake anywhere, and whatever they've got, I'll bring it the next time. And what I noticed is that over time, I just got to the point where, first of all, I remembered it a lot more often. But secondly, I just don't want to, if I don't have it with me, I don't want to get the milkshake. And really, life's not too bad if you're deprived of a milkshake. You're going to be okay. And I just didn't want it. I didn't want to make the garbage. So that felt like a little bit of a journey that I have been on. The other thing that I've been doing for a while is bringing my own container for takeout in restaurants in my neighborhood. And I have found restaurants to be receptive to it, some of the ones around me anyways, in downtown Kitchener. And there was kind of a blip around COVID where they weren't up for it, but we're back. And I find that it really eliminates a lot of waste that is probably not needed by any of us. It kind of comes down to the 3 R's that were expanded to many R's. I didn't see it in your chart, Jamie, but one that really spoke to me was refuse. We get a lot of free stuff in our lives, and it's just kind of like a polite habit to say thank you. But really, we can decline it. We don't need plastic forks if we're taking the food home to our house, or chopsticks. We probably don't need soy sauce in a little package. We don't need all those napkins. So I found it really empowering for me to bring my own containers. I see them at the restaurant. They'll sort through what I bring. No, that's too big. You're not getting that much. They'll take the ones they know they can use. And then I just wait a little bit and they bring it out to me. And I usually give them a tip to say thank you for doing something different like that. I have a zippered cooler bag that I bring it home in. It's a lot stronger than the plastic bags you usually get if you're walking, biking, or driving any of those ways. And it really does feel very good to have takeout without creating any garbage whatsoever. That is my learning journey on packaging with takeout food.
Great, thanks very much, Mary Jane. Okay, we're going to move on to our next community speaker, and I'd like to introduce Sydney Daniels.
Awesome. Thank you, Tom. Hi, everyone. First off, MJ, I loved your ice cream analogy. That was so cute. So hi, my name is Sydney. I'm a third-year student at the University of Waterloo in environmental studies. So obviously, a lot of the stuff we've been talking about is always on my radar. One thing I definitely noticed as a university student is food waste is also a big problem for us. Not only generating, but the composting aspect. A lot of my friends and I have talked about how frustrated we are with the fact that most university housing and apartments don't collect compost. So what my roommates and I have done is we always try to shop and cook together to avoid over purchasing of foods that we're not going to eat. We also try to store any food scraps we have, freeze them for a little bit, and then make them into vegetable broth for soups or whatever we need in the future, just as a way to reduce the amount that's ending up in our garbage, unfortunately. And then another thing students can definitely use for waste reduction involves fashion and clothing. Fast fashion is a big problem in the younger demographic. There's always tons of ads on Instagram and other social media platforms with dirt cheap clothing, and obviously that clothing is not very well made and will break down easily and is just not going to stick around for a long time. So making sure that you are thrifting or buying clothes that are from a really reputable company with good quality materials is really helpful. My roommates and I, we know each other very well, and we're also similar body shapes, so we're lucky enough that we can trade clothes very often. We'll borrow each other's clothes for different events. I also have very crafty roommates, so currently I'm working on my co-op term at an outdoor ed camp, and I needed a pair of khaki pants. However, the pair that I had didn't fit me anymore, so my roommates and I were able to actually cut little slits along the legs and reattach them around the waist so that I was able to give these pants a new life and not throw them away right away and buy a new pair. So learning some tips and tricks about mending and sewing and being able to rewear clothes that were not in the best shape or fit has definitely been a big help for us. But overall, for university students especially, is just trying to be adaptable with waste, because obviously we have a budget that is pretty tight as a student. So doing what you can is the best way to go about things. If you can't buy the newest zero waste XYZ product, that's okay. Do what you can, and those things will come along later in life. But trying to reduce the amount that you're creating in the first place has definitely been the biggest factor for me personally.
Great, thanks, Sydney. Thank you for the comments. And finally, our last community speaker tonight is Tim Alamanchuk. And Tim is going, I know Tim has recently become a new dad. I'm not sure if it was for the first time or second or third time, but I know Tim has got something that he wants to share with respect to that aspect of his life just starting up recently, and perhaps some other things too. So over to you, Tim.
Great. Thanks so much, Tom. Yeah, so my name's Tim. I'm a new dad. I have a 15-month-old named Ollie. And what Sid was talking about, you know, with not having very much money, and so price being a factor, that's been a huge impact in our life. When we first had Ollie, we really tried to do everything we could to keep waste down and to keep new purchases down, especially. There's a wonderful underground economy of parents who just give each other things because the kids only use them for, you know, sometimes a few weeks. So we were able to be the beneficiaries of that. But what ended up happening as well is that family members especially would buy us things. And it's really tough to say something when you're given a gift, and to say, you know, we're actually trying to only have like used clothes and keep it really low waste. And we did, as politely as possible, try to say that, but it didn't stop the tide of clothing that came flooding at us. So we've managed to again recirculate that through the parent economy. Locally. I think what I really wanted to say today is there's an important balance between individual choice and system change that needs to happen. Sometimes you don't really have a choice. We had to buy formula for Ollie, and formula comes in 3 different forms. It comes in concentrate in cans, it comes in pre-mixed in plastic bottles, or it comes in powder in paper tubs. The powder is probably the least wasteful, but anyone who's also a parent would know there was a formula shortage, and for quite a while you could only get pre-mixed formula. I did have a small choice between the plastic containers of ready to feed and the cans of concentrate, and metal is much more recyclable than plastic. It's got a better track record for that. So that to me was maybe it's not a perfect zero waste option, but it is a lower impact way of purchasing. And the final thing I wanted to talk about too is around diapers, which are the biggest single source of waste, I believe, in a lot of urban landfills. And it's really tough. We were gifted a cloth diaper service by the place that I work, which is Reep, and I'm on parental leave now, but the gift of a cloth diaper service got us started, and they picked up and took away the diapers and cleaned them and gave us new diapers every week, and it was really wonderful. Our washing machine is very old and we cannot afford to replace it. I don't believe that it would be able to handle washing, the amount of cloth diapers that we would need. After about a year of using that service, we looked at the numbers, and it was costing us about 4 times as much as disposable diapers would cost. In part, that is because disposable stuff is so cheap, and the system has made it that way. In part, it's because a service for cloth diapers is kind of a luxury on the scale of things. Now, at the point we were at, I would be open to buying a set of cloth diapers for Ollie going forward, but as he's entering, he's 15 months, he's hopefully going to be out of diapers at some point in the reasonably near future. But it's actually quite tough to find your own cache of cloth diapers. Again, the underground parent economy will provide. People will sell off their old caches of diapers. So that's something that we're looking at. But really, with all of the chaos that comes from being a first-time parent and all of the adjustment and learning and adapting, you just kind of do what works, and we do our best to keep it low waste, but our priority really is to get through the day. For example, we cook now. Ollie's eating a lot of solids. He's off formula, and we cook all of his meals. But over the past week or so, he's been very picky and refusing food to the point that he's getting quite grumpy and hungry because of it. So today I had to buy a bunch of those puree packs that come in disposable packages. That's all that's really available within a reasonable price range, unless I went to a really fancy organic store. And yes, I could make my own puree, and I bought some stuff to do that. But when you have a screaming toddler in the car seat at Superstore, it's kind of an emergency situation. So that's I think where that self-forgiveness piece comes in, and thinking, okay, how can I do better next time? We have a blender, we have the stuff to make purees. So can I make some and freeze some so that I have it ready to go for in the event that he goes through another picky period, which he almost certainly will. So that's really what I wanted to talk about tonight, and to underscore that piece of self-forgiveness, of doing better, and of the importance of both the system changing to make more sustainable choices possible and, making careful individual choices. Thanks so much.
Great, thanks very much, Tim. Some really great comments from all three of our community members, and just thinking about your comment, Tim, about it being so easy to pick the disposable or the, rather than, sometimes it's hard to get something repaired. It's hard to go out of your way to do something. It's so much easier just to buy that disposable product or to replace something with a brand new one, especially if you can afford it. So that's definitely an obstacle that we all face in trying to reduce waste in our lives. I'm going to turn it back over to Julie.
Thanks, Tom. Our next presenter is Olivia Forbes, and she comes from the Reep Green Solutions. She will tell us tonight about the Zero Waste Challenge, which we can all participate in coming up in the month of October. So Olivia, I will let you take it away.
Thanks, Julie. Let me just share my screen. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, awesome. So my name is Olivia. I'm the current interim communications manager for Reep, and I've been working with Reep for about 7 months. And this year will be my first time participating in the Zero Waste Challenge, so I'm excited to talk about it. So starting off, what is the Zero Waste Challenge? So the Zero Waste Challenge is a public awareness campaign that encourages people to reuse and recycle more. And it's just it's an opportunity for us to physically see how much waste we consume, and it gives us the opportunity to also find ways to waste less. So how does it work? It starts off with the iconic component, which is the 1 liter mason jar that everyone in the slide is holding right now in their hands. And if you're not able to get access to a mason jar, you can also use a small plastic bag, a Tupperware container, or even a zippered pouch, just something where you can physically see what you're putting into it. And so after you have your mason jar or other means, you have to put single-use waste into it. So with the single-use waste, you're just putting that into it that would otherwise go to the landfill. And so an example of that would be snack bags, chip bags, cereal bags, plastic wrappers that would go around, cutlery, etc. And after that, after you've already been putting things in that for a few days and it fills up, then go to the third part, which is to examine and adjust. And in that way, you're able to see how much waste you actually are producing on a daily basis. And you're able to identify those areas of change in your behavior or your daily habits that you can make in the future. So for example, if you signed up for the 7-day challenge and your jar is filled on like at the end of day 1, that's not an opportunity to be sad or just feel ashamed or anything. What you can do is look at the jar. You can look and see, okay, why did it fill up so quickly? What can I do differently? Did I fill it up with too much snack bags? Okay, let me find a way to use less snack bags. And that concept can be applied to so much other things. And so it's not a competition. It's not a race to see how much trash you can stuff into a small space. It's just an opportunity to just see how much waste you are producing on a daily basis and finding out those ways where you can make those small changes. Because to produce a community-wide shift, it all takes place with personal transformation first. And so to become involved in the Zero Waste Challenge, all you have to do is go on to reepgreen.ca/ZWC, and you can sign up for one of the 3 challenge durations that we're offering this year. So first is the 30-day challenge that starts on October 1st and ends on the 30th. And we're also offering the 7-day and the 14-day. The 7-day is from October 16th to the 22nd, which actually aligns with the National Waste Reduction Week in Canada. And you can also go for the 14-day, which is from the 16th to the 29th. And so that is the end of my presentation. I encourage everyone to sign up for it. Like I said, it is my first time doing it. And at first it was a bit nervous just thinking about putting trash into a mason jar. But like I said earlier, I realized it's not a race, it's not a competition. And I'm excited to see how much waste I reduce on a daily basis and which small changes I can make. Because if a lot of people make small changes, that produces a bigger impact. Thank you for allowing me to present that.
That is good to know, Olivia. Thank you so much for the information. And we do encourage everyone to take the challenge in October.
So this brings us to our Q&A portion of the webinar, and I'll ask all of our speakers tonight if you could just go ahead and turn on your video when you get a chance. So first of all, I wanted to start off with one of my questions. I had a question for Jamie, and it's a follow-up to your presentation. With respect to the institutions, the governments, the corporations in Canada, as you alluded, this is of course part of the problem in Canada. I believe it's about 60% of waste is generated by corporations, institutions, governments, and 40% by the rest of us. And I'm just wondering, is anything being done in Canada to put pressure on corporations, institutions, etc., to do a better job of reducing their waste?
I don't see any pressure. I see things like, for instance, the bans that they're putting in for instance, single-use plastics that's trying to I guess give signals to industry that the Canadian government is looking at the problem products and looking to ban them, and hoping that corporations will understand that and make a shift on their own. Usually that doesn't always work that well. You usually have to put a little bit more pressure on it. So I don't really see a lot of pressure in that sense. What I do see though is a lot more of the government, usually local or regional, that's putting investments in towards, for instance, smaller startups or organizations that are doing really good things like reusable container programs, a lot of reuse stores. So they're trying to put a lot more I guess startup money into those areas. So shifting the funding, I would say, is what they're starting to do, which is a really good thing. And that's what we always say. So one of the key things for the hierarchy is one of my favorite policies is shifting of resources. So the diagram that I showed was really just an infographic, but I really wanted to comment on for Julie, because she was mentioning that she didn't see the refuse on there. But the zero waste hierarchy is actually like a 9-page document. And the very first part of rethink and redesign, the very first one that was added, and I'll read it out quickly, is consider if a purchase is necessary and reject unnecessary, unsolicited items. So she'll be happy to hear that that's actually the very first bullet point in the actual hierarchy document in there. And that was added last year by one of our colleagues in Costa Rica. They're the ones that wanted that included in the hierarchy. So I just wanted to put that in there.
Great. And second part of that question, are you aware of any country or countries in the world that are really model countries that are doing a really great job of pressuring corporations, et cetera, to do a better job?
I would say Europe is doing a fantastic job in a lot of their policies. So they're really focusing on the reduction strategy, focusing on reduction and eliminating single use. So for instance, a few years back, and France in particular, France has been really focusing on the single use packaging, trying to reduce that. And so things that they put in place, for instance, to reduce the amount of waste, and designed obsolescence is another one, when we're talking about things that are designed to break down. So what they've done is they've mandated that for large appliances, the manufacturer has to have, I think it's a 10-year warranty or more It's mandated they have to have that, and they also have to have parts available for that product to be for that item to be repaired for that length of time. So they're putting in policies like that that's really driving these changes, which is great. So there's a whole other area of Europe that's doing other stuff, but Europe as a whole, European Union as a whole, is doing a lot of really great policies, and a lot of that's due to our colleagues in Europe from Zero Waste Europe. Actually, they're pushing those ideas.
Great, thank you, Jamie. If anybody else would like to jump in with any comments, great. Otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to Julie for the next question. Looks like we're good to go, Julie.
So we have a question that came into us in advance, and it's about the pros and cons of the blue box programs that the municipalities will be transferring to privatized companies. Do we expect that to be happening? Like, what more do we expect as the end user, I guess we call us, with the blue box? Will there be any changes when municipal, they give it over to the private companies?
I'll start. We have some time, so I'll start this question off from the beginning in terms of recycling, the recycling industry as a whole. So we really, as consumers and as users of that system, have very little control in the first place, regardless if it's municipality or private corporations. We have very little control in terms of how it's collected, where it's going, how it's being processed, where those products are being marketed, what it's being converted into in terms of recycling. So let's just say that first of all, to say kind of where recycling is. We really don't have a lot of transparency on that. So when a private corporation takes over those programs, really what that's doing is, in one sense, it's alleviating the municipality from relying on waste. I would say even recycling we consider waste. Like anything we toss out or discard is still considered waste. It lets the municipality then focus on putting those their financial resources and building up maybe a reuse community or community to avoid waste. And then every dollar everything that they save from, for instance, every tonnage of material that they avoid giving to that processor will be money saved for that community. So that's kind of the benefit and the whole kind of environmental aspect of it. When you have a community that's relinquishing that, for instance, waste, if they're shipping it somewhere else, now you're not worried about losing jobs at a landfill, because sometimes a community that owns a landfill, they have people working there, they have trucks driving those landfill trucks. So if we're reducing the amount of waste going to landfill, then we're worried that we're going to take jobs away from that. But if we send that waste somewhere else, every waste we reduce, every tonnage of material we reduce is savings for the community, and they can put that into other programs, other aspects. In terms of where that material is going or how it's going to be handled, I don't think it's going to be any different, because the city was probably just picking it up and transporting it to a processor, and those private haulers will be doing the exact same thing. So that's the only. So in a nutshell, one is you're going to lose those jobs from the city, but hopefully the city has kind of thought of that and thought about what they're going to do with those resources, and maybe either repurpose those jobs somewhere else, or do something else with that funding.
And there was a second part to that question. This person had heard that the pickups for recycling at like churches, mosques, temples will be eliminated. Is that true?
That I'm not sure. I'm not as familiar with that specific program, so I wouldn't know that piece of it.
Does anybody, like Tim or Mary Jane, Olivia, would you know, Sydney, if that is true?
So I had a conversation with the Region of Waterloo Waste Management team more than a year ago. And at that time, they were looking ahead to the implementation of this policy, and they're watching it happen in other jurisdictions in Ontario. This policy being the shift to private private recycling. I've heard nothing about religious institutions or anything like that being excluded, but at the time that I talked to the region, they said they were looking at how it unrolled in other jurisdictions and going to plan accordingly. It seems to me to be something that is still being figured out. How the program will change, or if it will change at all. It might not. It might, from the perspective of putting your box at the end of your street, it might just be the same. But it still remains to be seen, as far as I know.
So one thing I want to say is that if the change is being done strictly to a private hauler, that's then going to decide where the materials go, then it'll probably be the same thing where moss will be picked up from, but there's probably a charge there. But if the change is because it's a stewardship program coming in, and that stewardship agency is now taking over the transportation, usually, for instance, in BC, those products are only accepted in the program if they're residential products. So a resident has bought the product and they put it at the curb, then the cost is embedded when you buy that product, the cost of collection and processing. Whereas it wouldn't be the same thing if a mosque or a church had bought those products and put it at the curb. They would be excluded from that program. So they would have to then source their own company to haul that material. So I have a feeling that might be what's happening, and that sounds like that's probably the case in this situation.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jamie. Okay, our next question, question's coming in from Heather. Another recycling slanted question. What is the best way to improve the 10% acceptable recyclables? I assume that's in our region. Or is it beyond our control in that the region accepts plastics that overseas doesn't? So does that question come through clearly, Jamie?
I'm not quite sure what they're trying to say about the 10% acceptance rate for.
I have a feeling that 10% is what's acceptable in our region. Sorry, out of all possible things you could recycle, only 10% are actually acceptable by our region. So the question would be,
Right.
Is there any way to improve that so that more than 10% of things that people could recycle are actually accepted by our region? Or is it that whoever we bring the recyclables to, they're very specific about what
Right.
they'll only take that 10%?
I'm going to say that what we need to do, and I'm going to draw on a little bit from what Julie was saying and what Sydney and Tim and everybody's saying, is what we need to do is talk more about refillable, reusable systems. So, we need to be able to talk to the stores, talk to the government and say, recycling is great, it's fine, but what we need is we really want to be able to have refillable containers, reusable containers, and we want to make it mainstream. We don't want to make it where it's up to the consumer to beg the retailer to take our reusable container and to fill up our reusable container. During COVID, I used to be pre-COVID, I was that person that would, I was always nervous. I go and I thought that the movement would be everybody has to go in and we should be able to be allowed to bring in our own containers. I decided, no, it's industry that needs to provide us with the solution, and they need to be able to give us that system so we can use it and participate in it instead of the other way around, because it's not going to work the other way around. It will not work if individuals have to go and bring our own containers and all mismatched and wondering if they're going to accept it today, wondering if they're going to remember. They have to make it. So that's the way we're going to reduce our waste, not by necessarily expanding the different types of materials we can recycle. We need to make sure that we limit and streamline what's recycling in terms of the main established markets like cardboard. There's some high value plastics, glass, metal, but really we need to focus on reusable, refillable.
I've got a comment here from Dawn. She says paying more for a product doesn't always mean it is better. And she cites kitchen appliances as a great example, because what's often hard to find is the person to fix those bigger appliances. So does anybody have a solution for that, or just a comment that they want to say to help, or just what they feel about that comment?
I was just going to make a comment that as one of Jamie's recent comments, where you were talking about Europe and how they're implementing policies whereby when you build one of these products like a washing machine, it also you have to also make sure that parts are available for a certain period of time. And I know people have been talking about not being able to repair their washing machine because the repair guy says you can't get the circuit board for that anymore. So certainly that is an issue, and I guess one of the solutions is implementing some sort of a policy whereby the manufacturer must keep parts available for a certain length of time. I see Mary Jane's got her hand up. Go ahead, Mary Jane.
Yeah, there is some kind of legislation that was introduced in the House of Commons, and I have to admit, I don't know where it is now. Jamie, I'm guessing you're on top of that, but the right to repair bill just sounds like it's ridiculous. We have to ask for this. But it sounds like it's a really important systemic change that will make a difference for manufacturing going forward.
Yeah, 100%. The right to repair, and our Canadian government is really on board with that, which is fantastic. So that's a start. Really making, but also following European lead and making those manufacturers have those warranties, so they're guaranteeing that those products will last. We know they can. I've got old appliances that I've had since a kid that I'm using, and they last longer than a new one that I'm going to buy tomorrow. So, we know that they know how to make them last longer. They're just not doing it because they don't see it as profitable. So we need to make sure that they're making their products last longer, repairable. And one thing I want to say, and this is really important, is that we have these stewardship programs coming in. They're taking over the recycling industry. They're taking over the products in terms of electronics and small appliances. And they're making people feel great about being able to take your electronics or small appliances somewhere and they'll recycle it. The problem is these stewardship programs are not looking at reuse and repair, and they need to start. They have this infrastructure to collect. They have the funding because they make the money as soon as you buy the product. They need to start setting up repair infrastructure where all those products are brought into a centralized system. They can be evaluated, repaired, fixed, and put right back out onto the market so people can use them again and extend the life of those products instead of just destroying them and recycling what they can and dumping the rest. So that's very important because stewardship programs are very large programs. They're sucking up all the materials and all those items, and they're just destroying them. And then they're trying to recycle what they can and dump the rest. And I have to apologize, Mary. I've been saying Julie the whole time, but also I meant yourself. So you're the one. Julie's image is right in front of me, so I apologize for that, Mary. But
no problem. And I'm not familiar with that term stewardship program, Jamie. Can you give us an example of a
right. So
the name of a program?
It's called extended producer responsibility. So the one that everybody knows the most would be Encore. So bottles and cans, so beverage containers. So I always say that if a stewardship program, if they really work the way they should work, every bottle and can in Canada would be refillable. We wouldn't just be collecting them to recycle them. They would be refilling them like we did with beer, like we do with wine bottles. They would have a system. Gable tops and Tetra Paks would not exist if these stewardship programs were doing what they were supposed to do in the first place. This is a 30-year program. They've had 30 years to work on this, and they're still just talking about recycling. And we really need to make sure that we move them beyond recycling and stop, just, giving them praise for just the recycling they're doing and move them towards refillable systems. We really need that.
Okay, anybody else want to jump in before we move on? Okay, we're gonna move on to the next question. Do policies like demanding that the purchaser pay a deposit, which is refunded when the container is returned, work well? How might manufacturers progress toward reusable containers?
that's a tricky one. I want to say yes, but at the same time, a lot of people don't have the financial means to always be able to pay an upfront deposit on a lot of things. So if you went to the grocery store and everything was refillable and you had to pay a deposit on absolutely everything, every container that you had, you could add probably an extra 30 or $40 to your bill, possibly. I don't know exactly what the deposits would be, but that's something that would worry me. But I do think there are solutions around that. Yeah, so that's my comments on that. But I'd like to hear other people's comments too, for sure.
Anyone else have any experience with paying a deposit for something, and then did that motivate you to make sure you brought that back?
I do. I get yogurt from a place where it's in a glass jar and I can bring it back. And it does motivate me to bring it back because it's $1 or $2 each time. But I do really like not having all those plastic cartons stack up and pretending I'm going to use them all to free stuff in, because there's just no way. There's too many of them. So it's really nice to, there's something clean about it.
Go ahead, Sydney.
Yeah, along the similar line, in one of the study places we have on campus, the ESS Coffee Lounge, they have a like borrowing mug program, but you have to give them your student card in order to use the mug, and then obviously you can't go anywhere without your student card. So that's been a really good incentive and easy because it's not costing any money. But that's been really useful for us for sure.
Anybody else like to chime in there? I just also want to make a comment. Heather that had asked the question about the 10% getting recycled, and she's just clarified. What I meant is that of the recycling we put out, only 10% gets recycled, and the rest will probably be put in garbage due to contamination, etc. And so she was trying to get at, you know, what are the things that we can do to try to get that percentage up higher than 10%. And obviously some of the things you talked about, Jamie, in terms of education and educating people on, you know, not to contaminate, etc. All part of the, I think you covered all of that. With anything else you might want to add, Jamie, now that she's clarified that?
Yeah. So moving away from the single bin system for recyclables. So I think in Ontario, it's quite popular where you put everything into one bin. Some of that's in BC as well. So really what we were finding in different areas, different regions of the world, is the ones that have the source separated systems. So you have your paper separated from your mixed containers, separated from your glass, and then you have your food scraps. That tends to have a much lower contamination rate, and those clean products can get recycled better. Because if you're putting your paper into a mixed container bin and it gets food on it, that paper is going to rot and it's not going to be useful. So really, we want to keep those separated. You know, containers, they can be washed, right? But obviously you want to do your best and wash them. But they do have wash systems for plastics, and metals go to a smelter, so it's not big for metals. But really, it's the papers that you're worried about, and glass breaks. So you want glass separate as well.
Great, thanks, Jamie. Anybody else? Okay, I think we can move on, Julie.
Yes. Oh, no, Mary Jane, did she just put her hand up?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, sorry, mister.
I was just thinking about that statistic because it's really bumming me out. And I wondered if that was a local statistic or a Canada-wide statistic. We went for a tour of the landfill a couple of years ago, and they talked about having a really good, not contamination rate, I don't know what you call it, but that we are doing a good job of sorting in Waterloo region. So I hope it's not as bad here. And what I want to say is that today on Facebook, the Region of Waterloo Waste Management posted something, some neat thing about how to know whether your pizza box goes in the green bin or the recycling bin. And I was just amazed at how many negative comments were put up about how, who cares about trying to sort? It all ends up in the landfill anyway. A lot of negative comments about people not doing their job at waste management. Boy, there's a lot of skepticism about it. So I think if we have any good statistics locally, it would be really good to get them out there and help restore confidence in the sorting that we have in Waterloo Region.
Okay, well, thank you, Mary Jane, for that. Going on, recently, Ontario made producers, manufacturers of some products responsible for collecting their own packaging, or the used packaging, I should say. Does anybody know how is that going?
What was it? So we're asking how it's going with making producers responsible for collecting their own. So that would be what a stewardship program starts as. So it's about making the producer responsible for the waste after the product after someone has gotten rid of it. So they're responsible for setting up the collection system and the processing system. So in BC, we have a ton of those programs. We got the most, I think, probably in all of North America at least. And like I said before, very much focused on recycling, and very much focused on less innovation, more or less collection and recycling based on existing infrastructure. I have not seen a lot of new infrastructure created from these programs, other than the collection side of it. In terms of what they do with the material, it's a very low bar, and it doesn't move the needle very much in terms of innovation or environmental stewardship, in my opinion.
And I guess that the question was specific about Ontario, and I know you won't know this, Jamie,
Right.
but the person who asked was asking how it's going in Ontario. How is that is it working or not? I don't know if anybody else knows, has heard anything about that. I'm not aware of anything. Okay, we will move on. This next question is specifically for Jamie, but of course other people can jump in. Jamie, what ways can individuals, NGOs, and communities support system change?
Oh, fantastic. Work with your local government, definitely, to drive policy towards refill, reuse. Anything you can do in those areas is fantastic. Definitely counter anything that involves burning waste as a solution. Like a lot of municipalities try to, they throw their hands in the air and they say, you know what, our landfills are filling up, so we're just gonna build an incinerator and we're going to burn it and try and get some energy out of it. Lots of problems with that, lots of downsides for the community with that. So you really want to make sure that the council avoids that, because that will take funding away from actual real positive solutions. You could imagine they could probably supply every new parent with reusable diapers in Canada with the amount that it costs to build an incinerator, right? So that's a huge money waster. So really making sure that people are aware. So that's why I always say, educate, get the education first. It's very fundamentals course is quite easy to go through. It's very easy to get on board with that, and then at least you know what to say or how to say it, and where to go from there. But definitely work with your local communities. There's also a Canada-wide organization called Climate Caucus. The Climate Caucus is municipalities that are banding together across Canada that are environmental and want to create environmental policies within their municipalities, and they actually help educate and help people get elected in municipal elections to help drive that change. So it's a really great organization. We have one of our sister organizations, Zero Waste BC. They work in the zero waste area of that organization. So that's something that I would recommend getting connected with for sure. It's called Climate Caucus.
Great, thanks, Jamie. Anybody, I guess that was specific for you, but anybody else want to jump in there at all? Okay, thanks.
So the next one comes from, it's again, Ontario is, I believe, the only province that has milk bags. If other provinces have jugs that are recycled, then the technology is there. Even though it doesn't cut down on plastic jugs, how can we get rid of these milk bags? So is Ontario the only province that has milk bags?
I'm not sure. Technically, milk bags should be recyclable though too if you had the program, but
I think this is a good question. I thought milk bags would probably be the most environmentally friendly version compared to the cartons. I don't
Yeah,
know, Jamie.
And the jugs.
well, if we want to talk on the recycling side, in BC, we do recycle film plastics, so soft plastics. Clear soft plastic is actually very recyclable. The colored ones not as much. So milk bags, I believe, are quite recyclable if they have, and it's established system in a lot of areas. So it's something that could be done. Again, I would like to drive more towards refillable, but that's, yeah, to me, it's always one or the other. I'm always thinking, well, let's just forget about that decision and just make it refillable. And then we have to think about it, right?
I mean, you can refill the milk bags when they've been emptied and cleaned by you, because
Yes,
they're thick enough that you can freeze stuff in that bag.
right.
Like it is
How
a
many
good
how many
bag to
milk bags do you
reuse.
need?
Yeah, it's a lot of bags.
So I always say that, how many milk bags do I need, or how many freezer bags do I need?
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Jamie. All right, next question. Technology items, this is coming from Don. Technology items like TVs, phones, and computers seem to have a shorter lifespan as technology changes so fast. What can we do with these older items? Older TVs can't work with the services provided by carriers. We had a 30-plus-year-old TV that worked fine, but we couldn't use it when we changed our service. We sold it to a gamer, but eventually it won't have a use anymore. But hey, that was a good step of selling it to a gamer. It's being reused. So that's a good step. But I guess the gist of the question is, other than selling it to a gamer, what can we do? Is there anything else we can do with these older items?
It's tough. It's you don't want to let go of it. You've spent a lot of money on it. You've had it for a long time, and then it just doesn't work with the technology. And I probably have a lot of things in my home that I just don't want to toss out, because even though it's not working anymore or with the technology. So I don't have a solution for that other than what you said, listing it, and maybe somebody has a purpose for it, like a gamer or something else. Someone might take it up to use it for a cabin or something where they don't need the upgrade. They need it for its basic function. We did that with an old furnace of ours that someone used it way up north in a cabin that they needed to heat. So.
Well, Julie, you work at the local thrift store, so I mean,
Yes.
there's lots of electronics that come in there, right?
Yes. Now they are a facility that takes the electronics and will recycle them through a program. But I do still see some things being reused and sold again, like vacuum cleaners, records. People are still buying records. They're still buying DVDs, CDs are still being purchased. So definitely there's a market out there. Do not throw it out. Take it to a thrift store. Chances are there's somebody out there that wants that, whether it's collectible to them or they're going to use it.
Go ahead, Mary Jane.
I think maybe we need a right to upgrade bill, because rather than trying to find a new use for all these things, why can't we just upgrade them using the same hard case that's already there? It just seems like another system thing where we're just allowing them to be manufacturers are getting money every time you buy one, and we should be able to just use the same housing.
Anybody else want to jump in with things to do with older items?
Yeah, that is something that we definitely want to push towards, is to make things to be able to be upgraded and repairable. That's definitely something going forward. So we don't want to lose sight and just lay down and say, oh, okay, we're going to accept that there's never anything we can do with these items. I always say, if we can send someone to the moon, we can definitely, you know, make things refillable, repairable, and last longer, right?
Go ahead, Sydney.
Yeah, with the reuse for someone else, I am the oldest of 3 sisters and have several older cousins, so we get a lot of hand-me-downs in my family, technology included. Like, I had all of my parents' old phones growing up and stuff, so using your family circle as well to re-gift items is definitely a good option.
Yeah, cell phones are a good example. I've inherited, or my wife and I have inherited several cell phones from our son-in-law when he was upgraded to new versions, and we were given the hand-me-downs, and they are fine for us. We don't need to spend a lot to get a brand new cell phone. So if you can move them around the family somehow, then that's great.
Yeah, so Linda asks about the TerraCycle program. Does anybody know, or can they comment on where is that available for our area? TerraCycle program.
I think anybody can get access to the TerraCycle program. It's just that it's a very expensive program, and it's not super transparent. So trusting in the process that what they say is happening is challenging, I would say. So, you know, when the cost is so high and there's lack of transparency, it's really hard to opt into it, I would say.
They're the company that will send you a box, like, or a container, and like for things like empty cosmetic tubes, and then you put that in there, you ship it back to them, and you're saying it's when you ship it back to them, what happens to the empty tubes?
Right.
Yeah.
How is it? And that's the crux with all recycling, right? Like the lack of transparency, and the higher the cost, the more the cost goes up. It's really harder to justify and to feel like it's actually happening. That's how I feel with these programs that are not 100% transparent on what's happening with the materials and where they're being shipped or what they're being transformed into.
Okay, Tim, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, so everything that Jamie said holds true. I'm kind of the opinion around TerraCycle that, like, yes, it's not super transparent, but at the end of the day, is it better than throwing your stuff in the trash? Maybe, because many of the products that they take are not recyclable. There are 2 different versions of the TerraCycle program. There's one that you pay and they send you a box and you collect stuff, and it is tremendously expensive, but there are some free recycling programs that are manufacturer sponsored. They do for oral hygiene products that I think is Crest sponsored. There's shaving products, there's different cosmetics. There are brand specific ones, like Burt's Bees sponsors a program. The answer to the question about our local area, there's a great Reep volunteer who had set up some boxes at Rockaway Community Center to collect Swiffer's oral hygiene products and razors, I believe, or shaving products. And there are also some boxes at the Downtown Community Center and at Mill Cortland Community Center, all in Kitchener. And all of the community centers also collect batteries, alkaline batteries for recycling. I'm not sure which program they use to recycle those, but they have been collecting those for quite a while. Yeah, and yeah, like I not trying to disagree with what Jamie said about TerraCycle. It's still kind of a mystery where stuff goes, but they do collect lots and lots of products. So at Staples, you can recycle pens and markers, and that's run by TerraCycle. Walmart takes cosmetics, that's also run by TerraCycle. But I think any efforts at kind of due diligence on what happens with the products, I haven't seen any like sort of credible reporting as to like it gets made into this or not. So.
Go ahead, Sydney.
One more group that I wanted to shout out that I learned from this past spring term. I took a course on fashion and sustainability, and we had one of the co-owners of Cocoon Apothecary, which is a Kitchener-based cosmetic company. They came in to talk about the work they were doing. They are EcoCert certified, so all of their materials are very well sourced. They're paying everyone responsibly, and they also offer a refillery program there, and also just opened a new spot if anyone's looking for that. It's called Cocoon Apothecary. They have really, really good stuff there.
Great, thanks. Anybody else? Okay, we will move on to the next one is a comment and a question from Dawn. Her first is a comment. If we made more products locally like we used to, we could reduce a lot of shipping, packages, and waste. Yes. And the second part is there was a story on the news about a mass merchandiser throwing returned items away instead of fixing or restocking them. Okay, so we can guess probably who it is, or it could be a number of different ones, but there is a mass merchandiser. And so when you return something, there has been stories out saying, okay, you know what, you think they're going back to where you bought them, but they actually go into this big warehouse and potentially then into a big container that gets shipped overseas somewhere and gets dumped somewhere, or something along those lines. How do we stop this? Should we not buy from them? Again, not mentioning any specific names, but how could we even stop this? Is there any way? Anybody want to tackle this one?
I think that our government is actually starting to look at developing laws to prevent retailers from destroying products and not reselling them. So I think that I saw that somewhere. I'm not exactly sure where or when. It was very recent. So I think that it is coming, but that's something that we need to work towards, is making sure that they can't just destroy the product, because you see it all the time where they'll cut it, or they'll spray paint it, or they'll do something to it so it can't be reused or resold, because either it's old stock, right? Old stock, or there's small defects, right, that people probably wouldn't care about. So I think that that's something that needs to be right in line with along with those policies for reducing waste.
Go ahead, Sydney.
With that, with clothes, especially, again, from the course I took in the spring, we did a few assignments where we went to the mall and looked through all the different sustainability stuff they had around their stores, if they had any at all. And I was shocked to learn about how much actually doesn't get put back once it's been returned. And easy way to fix that is to definitely cut back on the online shopping that you're doing for clothing, especially. Because if you have to buy new, then go to the store, try it on. You'll know it fits you great, and then you can leave without paying for shipping and having those emissions come off. COVID definitely got us into a bigger habit of shopping online. I used to be a big not advocate, but it was a part of my routine to like go in, find the size, leave it, go online, find the color, and then buy it there. But I don't do that anymore because I learned that they don't take it back as often as I thought they did. So just go in person because we can do that a lot more now than we used to.
Thanks, Sydney. Anybody else want to jump in there? And Jamie, I'm assuming that companies that will do this, basically it's cheaper for them to just get rid of it somehow than to repair it, right?
Well,
Or put it back into service.
I think they're worried about it. It's just they're worried about it going out onto the market at a cheaper cost than someone buying it from their store. So they can't sell it, so they just toss it because they want someone to buy something at a higher price from their store or new for their brand name. So that's the idea that I feel is behind it. I just wanted to make a comment on the comment about local production and just talk about a little about reuse and how many jobs that creates. So when we talk about refilling and reuse, that inherently brings jobs local in those areas because you're not going to have a reusable system, a refillable system that's hundreds of miles away or continents away. It's going to be local. You may have a bigger bulk reuse system if you're manufacturing and bringing things in from different continents, but it really brings things closer to home because it has to be. For those systems to work, they have to be very decentralized and they have to be local because that's the most efficient way of getting those containers around and moving them around and washing them and refilling them and all of that. Same with repair programs and all of that. So just by focusing on those areas will inherently bring more jobs locally.
And Dawn just responded to say, yes, she does not like, and this is in response to some of the comments, I don't like buying online, but stores are limited to what they can stock on the shelves. There is way more selection online, unfortunately.
This is true.
We've got another question that just came in from Linda. She'd like to know, is it true that some fast food restaurants that have designated containers for disposing garbage, recyclables, and compost items end up putting all of this in the garbage bin without sorting? If so, how can we challenge the fast food industry to dispose of the items appropriately?
I have witnessed that. I have seen that in different areas. I don't know if they all do it or if it's just some of them, some individual locations. But yes, that has been a concern for sure. I don't know the solution to it. I would like to see the fast food industry move into a reusable product. They would take care of all of that if they didn't have to throw it all out, then they wouldn't have to worry about how to manage it in that aspect. They would just take it back and wash it, which would be fantastic if they did that. Then they just have to worry about food waste, right? Like we used to do back in the day, right? So
Anybody else want to jump in there? Go ahead, Mary Jane.
I just have the impression that commercial businesses are not required by our province to sort, and that it's way cheaper to just have one truck take everything away. I think if we want to have streamed waste from businesses, including restaurants, we need to advocate our province to require that. Otherwise, they're not going to pay extra for that. They're going to make it look good and do the cheap thing.
and actually that's a good question. That's a good response, Mary, because I just remembered that the city of Nanaimo actually was piloting a bylaw where the businesses had to have source separated programs for their waste, and the haulers had to collect it sourced separately. So that was a new thing they put in their bylaw, and it had to be delivered separately. So they really wanted to cut this. So they're from the sounds of it, it's addressing exactly that problem of everybody trying to just pretend they're recycling and pretend they're composting, but then either just picking it up all together. Sometimes you'll see the same truck pick up the recycling and then pick up the waste bin and dump it in the same truck. That is a terrible practice. But if there's a bylaw, at least there's something that can be done. If it's discovered that they're doing that, of course, you have to find out that they're doing it first, which is not always easy. But yeah.
Great, thanks, Jamie. And Don made a comment. I noticed some Tim Hortons where everything goes to waste. Next time I will ask them, and I guess that's the point. I think individuals, if you ask, groups like Nith Valley EcoBoosters, if we go as a group and say, hey, we're interested in what you do with your waste, and we're hoping that you're taking care of it appropriately. And if some pressure is put on individual fast food outlets, then maybe we can do something. So I think that's I guess one of the few things we can do right now. I have another question that is my own question, and it's related to keeping things in the fridge. And I'm going to open this up to everybody. I've heard one of the ways that's recommended to not end up in that situation where you're looking in the back of the fridge one day and you go, oh my God, what is that? And you find something that's been there for 2 months. And I've heard the way you counter that is that you put things in your fridge according to the order of purchase, so that, okay, when you bring things home, you open up the fridge and an item that you just got goes to the back of the fridge, and the items that are in the back of the fridge come to the front of the fridge. And we've all heard the other suggestions, such as for your lettuce and spinach, they're happiest in your crisper, rolled up in a damp tea towel. Keep your berries unwashed and in their original container on a shelf in the fridge. Keep your bananas away from other things that ripen, so that they don't ripen too quickly. Things such as that. And I just wondered if anybody has any things that they do personally. Have you found anything of success with your fridge, keeping things fresh and eatable for as long as possible? Anybody want to jump in for any suggestions?
Yeah. My roommates and I do a couple things. One is we know that like lettuce and celery gets limp fast. So if you keep it in a shallow glass of water, that helps keep the transpiration going. So it keeps it nice and crisp. But also I've seen a version of where you put stuff in the fridge. If you put stuff that's going to go bad fast, you put it in the door so you see it right away. And then other stuff that won't go bad as fast, so like condiments and stuff, live in the middle part of the fridge. Stuff that's going to go bad quickly goes on the door, so you see it.
Thanks, Sydney. Anybody else got any words of wisdom?
I do have one rule for me with regard to leftovers. In my refrigerator, only transparent containers for leftovers. None of that. Use a yogurt container for spaghetti and forget that it's not yogurt anymore. So in my fridge, leftovers all have to be a transparent container, whereas the freezer can be the yogurt thing with tape on it that says what's in there, because it's not going to spoil.
Yeah, good idea. Anybody else?
Our fridge is teeny tiny, so we don't have a choice. We have to clean it out every week. When we get new food, yeah, we end up going through things pretty good just because we don't have the luxury of space.
Yeah, there's another way to do it.
Tom, Linda says that they use a special bin that they call Use Me First. And she said that helps them a lot.
And I see somebody else has suggested put celery in tinfoil. Great, thanks for those ideas, everybody.
Nice.
I
We
have,
cut out meat. We cut out meat in our family, so
oh, okay,
things last longer.
yeah, yeah. I have another question for you, Jamie, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I was reading some articles that are talking about how much waste we produce in Canada as individuals. And it's, I believe, 700, this is based on data from a few years ago, 2017, but I think it was 720 kilograms of waste produced per person in Canada. And if I'm not mistaken, we are that is the highest amount of waste produced in the entire world. That's 2 times as much as Japan. It's even 7% higher than the US, which really shocked me that we are producing more waste than the United States per individual. And this is the part that I don't want to embarrass you, but I know that you speak internationally, and when you go to another country and come in as the zero waste expert, people say to you, hey, aren't you the guy from Canada, 720 kilograms per person?
Right. I try to let people know. That's why I tell people my story is that I'm just an average person. So I do generate waste. I'm not zero waste. I definitely generate waste. I'm definitely in the camp with Mary where, I make mistakes all the time. I do my best, but yeah, when eventually you just avoid things when you can. When I go to takeout, I try to bring my takeout containers, but a good example was just the other day, we messaged the restaurant that we always use, and we send them a message saying we're bringing our own containers, and I show up and everything's already packaged in containers and bags, and I'm just like, right? So, but yeah, when I do presentations, it's interesting because I go to a lot of areas, like I went to the Philippines, I did a tour of the Philippines, and I did presentations there. And and it's just amazing meeting the people and how much kind of less waste they produce because they don't have a lot of stuff. So they just can't produce the waste because they don't have a lot. They're not buying a ton of stuff. So one of the things that we did was when we developed the zero waste definition, so I was the chair of that working group, and one thing came out because it was an international group that developed that definition, is you'll see in the definition, it doesn't talk about reduce. It doesn't talk about reducing our consumption. And the reason why is because internationally, there's a lot of regions in the world, they don't need to reduce their consumption. They don't have a lot, they don't consume a lot. So it's more of a North American thing to talk about reducing what we consume. So we really talked about just managing the resources responsibly and consuming responsibly. So that's what came out of the definition. So often I see people that kind of some environmentalists and some friends of mine are like, oh, you messed up on the definition. Like you totally forgot to put reduce in. And I'm like, no, that was completely intentional because it's an international movement and North America is not the center of that. We're just a part of it. So that's how I look at it when I go do international speaking.
Great, thanks, Jamie. Okay, we are getting near the end of our presentation. We're close to we've answered all the questions, and I'm just going to read a couple more comments that came through from people. I feel most people do want to reduce waste. We have to put pressure on businesses to do their part to make this happen. And that's from Dawn, and then from Jennifer. Treat your celery, romaine, etc. like flowers. Make sure they have a fresh cut to allow the moisture to get to the tips. Thanks very much for that, Jennifer. And just before we close off, I wanted to give everybody an opportunity, sort of a brief comment if you have any. Does anybody have anything that you did not get to say in your presentation that you would just like to sort of leave as your closing comment? And if not, that's okay, but we'll move on to our closing comments. Anybody like to just give a last few words of wisdom before we close off tonight? Anybody want to go first? Go ahead, Mary Jane.
Well, these aren't my words of wisdom, but I looked up the link that the region of Waterloo provided in response to all those people saying nothing ever gets recycled from the blue bin anyways. And I can send it to you, Tom, to include if you want. They've got a thing called Myth versus Fact. And they said over 90% of our blue box material gets recycled. So that just made me feel a lot better.
Okay, so maybe the person, they were talking about 10%, maybe the numbers got mixed up there in terms of they thought it was 10% that were not being, only 10% was being recycled. Okay. Yes, thanks. If you could send that to me, we can include it in our resource documents. Anybody else like to say anything out in closing tonight? Last chance.
Yeah, I just want to say that one of the main policies that we have is shifting of resources. So you'll notice that my presentation, or when I talk and answer questions, I'm always talking about reuse and reduction and refill. That's intentional. In the past, I used to talk about recycling. That's my history, but I've shifted my resources, which is my time and my presentation time, to talk about reuse, reduction, repair. And I just want to hope that everybody else will follow suit and start moving in that direction as well.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Jamie.
So I just would like to say we would like to thank our supporters for this event. That is the Township of Wilmot, Future Ground Network, and Kindred Credit Union.
We also want to remind you that within the next 3 to 4 days, hoping Monday, you'll get an email that'll include a link to a recording of this webinar. It'll also have the resource document that I talked about earlier, a link to the webinar feedback survey. If you don't get a chance to fill it out tonight when we end the webinar. And then for those of you that are interested, we will also send details regarding specific actions that you can take to show solidarity with Indigenous members of our Waterloo Region community.
And thanks to all of our panelists and our speakers tonight for their presentations and to helping answer questions from our participants. And thank you, everyone who's participated tonight. I hope that you have enjoyed the webinar and are now motivated to launch your waste reduction journey. Thank you and have a good evening.